You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday. We're this close to being able to get our cellos out and practicing all weekend. But first, Cello Chat. This week's Cello Chat, by the way, is brought to us sponsored by UW-Whitewater's own Young Auditorium. Please check out their always interesting series of concerts at uww.edu/Young Auditorium. And my guest this week is Dr. Bruce Uchimura of Western Michigan University. Bruce, how are you doing?
Good afternoon. Terrific. And so glad that I'm teaching face-to-face again. So, albeit with a mask.
Right. But still, hallelujah. It's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Well, for any of the viewers who aren't as familiar with your playing and your work, can you introduce yourself and tell about your musical background?
Certainly. So I've been a long-time professor of cello, chamber music, and conductor of the University Symphony Orchestra at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan, not so fictitious city, for many years. And I've been very blessed to have a lot of wonderful opportunities at this institution to pursue the things that the university's mission, School of Music, and as well as my own professional advancements and so forth. So originally I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii, hence the aloha shirt that I'm wearing, sort of. And I grew up in Honolulu and was very privileged to have gone to a very fine private school named Punahou, where Barack Obama went, and Barack Obama was actually my brother's classmate. And of course, like most of us, had a really excellent music educator. His name was Peter Mesrobian. I think he was originally Armenian, obviously, and from New York. And he came to the Hawaiian Islands and started the string program, which was, you don't know this till later, but it was incredible. That was sort of a golden age of music education. And he was able, for example, to buy a whole bunch of Juzek cellos very, very cheaply. And that, of course, then he also experimented with fiberglass. Well, in those days, what the fiberglass instruments were. But the Juzeks were actually pretty good instruments. And I think some of them are still in use at the Punahou orchestra program. So he was really good. He was also one of those that was very progressive about taking the more advanced students that were interested in music, starting them in a string quartet. I was playing a string quartet by the time I was in 7th grade, on Haydn and things like that, and very encouraging for private lessons and so forth. And of course, in Honolulu, it's much like living in Kalamazoo or Whitewater. We have it's a small town. Then it was a small town. It's not so much now as if any of you visit. There's a lot of traffic in Honolulu, but in those days, there was certain places that you took music lessons, certain people that you took lessons, only one symphony orchestra, et cetera, et cetera. So those were all very good resources, which propelled my interest in music. He also let me cut PE so that I could practice in the orchestra room in the days. So that sort of started. And I did have a private teacher, wonderful cellist, not so great a teacher, that didn't teach me how to practice and so forth. So it was sort of learning on my own. Now, she taught me wonderful things about music. And of course, in those days, you found very good cellists, everywhere. So she had been to Curtis and Juilliard and studied with Felix Salmon and Leonard Rose and so forth and so on, Piatigorsky. And so, she was really quite a wonderful cellist. But, of the old school, how do you do it? Well, you just practice a lot and just sort of do it, and she did teach me a lot about music. But so I felt like most of my work was sort of on my own. While I adored her, we had a great relationship. I just practiced and practiced and practiced badly, I should say. And then come junior and senior year, wondering what to do with ourselves all the time. When in Hawaii, being an Asian American, third generation, and going to Punahou, then the practical thing is to go to an Ivy League school and become a lawyer, banker, a businessman, something, and that wasn't the path that I wanted. So I was very lucky. At the time, there was a summer program called Congress of Strings, And so everybody from West Coast and Hawaii and so forth went to University of Washington, Seattle. Everybody from the East Coast went to University of Cincinnati. Free, 9 weeks, fantastic experience. Great conductors, was orchestra, a little bit of chamber music, and the faculty were very good. So at the time, there was a former Leonard Rose student that was principal cellist of the Seattle Symphony, Ray Davis, and he was an immense inspiration to me. Because in Hawaii, we don't know, this was my first summer thing that I ever did, summer going into my senior year of high school. And it was unbelievable to me what music was and how I measured up and so forth and so on. So at final lessons, he told me, so what are your plans for next year? Probably in his mind, meaning, where are you going to apply to music school? And I said, well, I don't know. I think I'm going maybe to the UCLA 6-year dental program. And he looked at me like, he said, you want to be a dentist? And I said, well, it's practical and so forth and so on. He says, well, I was going to write you a recommendation to go study with Leonard Rose at Juilliard. And I thought, holy moly, so that, of course, piqued my interest in what I was going to do. So I did apply actually to him, to Juilliard. Was lucky enough to get accepted. It was one of those weird events that I actually flew to New York City for the audition weekend, played for Leonard Rose like the day of my audition, right before. And he said, okay, good, I accept you. He said, but don't play this and play this first and so forth and so on. He didn't like my Bach. He said, don't play your Bach, it's too fast. So wow. Go into the audition. And so I did audition. And so I did apply to a couple of other places, wonderful places. UCLA, Jeff Solo was then teaching there, and I had heard his recordings, thought he was a wonderful cellist, And other places, interesting. Starker came through Honolulu. Honolulu is blessed because everybody wants to pass through there, either on their way to the Orient or in general want to come and play there. So whenever a Honolulu Symphony had a guest artist, my teacher would arrange, can you play for him and so forth and so on. So I did play for Starker at the Kahala Hilton Hotel, in his hotel room. He was very grumpy. He was smoking. And he told me at the time, this was after already I had auditioned for Juilliard and was intending to go to Juilliard. He said, well, you're a talented cellist, but you don't really know how to play yet. So my advice to you is go someplace small where you can learn how to play cello, get all your fundamentals and so forth. And he says, then you can go wherever you want, Indiana, including Indiana. He said, Juilliard, whatever. Well, that was very wise advice. But at the time, you have, if you get accepted to a Juilliard with Leonard Rose, you go. So yeah. I went. Fortunately, the Starker thing, because that came back in my life later. He was at the time also in the summers, Starker and his protege, Tsuyoshi Tsutsumi at the time, who's now back in Japan, gave master classes at Banff and in the Canadian Rockies, which was also mind-numbing to me coming from the Hawaiian Islands to take the train. I took the train from Vancouver, and in the morning you rise up and these majestic mountains were there, and I thought, wow, I'm actually going to be here for a summer. And they were giving master classes, unbelievable in those days, 2 3-hour master classes a day, every day, 6 days a week. 1 day off. And so that was an incredible experience because I got to experience Starker's view of how to teach and how the cello should be played and music and so forth, which I found astounding to me. That it was just, it opened my mind to, wow, this is not only interesting, but, there's hope to learn how to play the cello properly and so forth. So that was my sort of coming to that. I then went to New York City and studied with Leonard Rose. I was almost one of his last classes because he died 2 years after I graduated, which was very sad. We were way too young, of leukemia at 66, I think he was, which was really a great loss to all of us. And he had a very incredible assistant at Juilliard named Channing Robbins, who nobody knows about, but Channing was an extraordinary cello teacher and a wonderful, supportive person to those that took an interest in him and what he had to say. So that was really a saving grace. I love New York. When a Hawaiian kid goes to New York City, it's like a kid in a candy shop. I thought this was the most wonderful thing that I'd ever seen, so different from the Hawaiian Islands, And so I did love the experience. Juilliard was a bit intimidating, as you might imagine, for me, because I didn't know what I was doing. And, I would go to school and, this kid played Boccherini Concerto when he was 15 with the Philharmonic. And this person is from France and this person is from Sweden. It was terribly intimidating to me. But I did my best. And I think I learned a lot about music, certainly with all those great old musicians, right? These are all the old European Jews that immigrated and were teaching at the time. Felix Gallimir, Paul Doctor, wonderful people. Dorothy DeLay was there giving classes, etc. Harvey Shapiro, Klaus Adam of the original Juilliard Quartet. I mean, these were wonderful musicians. The Juilliard Quartet, Robert Mann, unbelievable musicians. So I was really lucky to hear that. And then all the concerts, all the perks that come with living in New York. On any given night, you can be very inspired by somebody's recital or concert, so forth and so on. So that was all good. However, when I went to my graduate degree, I knew I needed help. So then the Starker thing comes around. I went to Cleveland Institute of Music to study with Alan Harris, who was one of Starker's first cello students, and was an amazing, his own man, but an amazing assimilation of all Starker's principles, but in Alan Harris's way. Remember, he's a cowboy from Kansas and a very modest and quirky guy, but he was a wonderful teacher to me at the time that I think I needed those things. I remember the most famous comment that he ever gave to me was, he played, and a Juilliard way in those days was, if you can't play in tune or you can't really do what you want on the cello, then you start moving around and looking like you can play. And so he said, Uchimura, you're kind of all style and no substance, kind of like putting lipstick on a pig. Ooh. And I knew from that day he was the teacher for me. So that was very good. And then I started my career. Played 3 years in the Augusta Symphony in Georgia, which I really liked. Became associate conductor for 1 year of that 3-year stint, and then got the job at Western Michigan University, and there I have been since then. So that's my journey,
Outstanding. Oh, I love that story was so full of interesting ideas and nuggets in there too. That was fun. Quite a bit of that I didn't know.
Yeah. Now you do.
yeah, no, it's great. Now, so your background in the past many years as being very devoted to your teaching, your solo playing, chamber music playing, and conducting. So I guess, first of all, I'm a little bit curious about what drew you to conducting initially, and then ever since I've known you, you've had very high energy, high enthusiasm with nice doses of humor from there and there. And I'm wondering, were those the sorts of attributes that you already had previously and that kind of you thought, okay, this is going to work well on the podium too? Or were there ways in which these various perspectives as a conductor and a performer and in chamber music and a teacher kind of inform each other and bring out those sorts of ways that naturally keep students engaged and focused?
Very interesting question. And I think you've said a lot of what has occurred over the years. The conducting thing, now I go back to the Punahou days. From the time I was an elementary school kid, some music teacher of mine recognized the conducting bug in me. And so I remember in 3rd grade, believe it or not, my music teacher, who was also a very good general music teacher, Miss Stewart, would get me up on a chair, probably would be sued these days, and have me conduct the songs. It was very interesting, sort of. So that was my earliest memory of sort of conducting, and I liked it. It was a wonderful experience, even in those days, of hearing this beautiful unified sound. And the fact that I could get it just by lifting my arms and eliciting that, right, isn't conducting. I always say conducting, for those that can conduct, is much easier than playing the cello, much easier. But so that was, and then of course in high school, also Mr. Mesrobian recognized my abilities, personality-wise and so forth. Yes, I've always been sort of a personality. And so he got me on the podium and literally had me conduct, not every concert, but, once a year, maybe, since I was I think it started freshman or sophomore year.
Wow.
an entire piece. So I remember this, one of my big ones was Merle J. Isaac's arrangement of March Slav, which was a thriller for me because I love the music. And, Merle Isaac was such a great icon in our profession. And his arrangements are still used, should be still used, because some of them are really, really good. Anyway, that started. Then I forgot about it. No conducting, because when you go to Juilliard, you practice. And that's all that was on my mind. And conducting never even entered the picture, although I guess it was always in the back of the mind, till I went to Augusta, Georgia. And as a way, I went with some kind of pitiful salary, $8,500 a year or something like that, to play principal cello, which was rewarding. We had a quartet. We would give concerts. Chamber music was always my saving grace. I should go back to that. And, there's this huge correlation between conducting and chamber music. So if you're good at chamber music, you know what you're doing, then you can become a good conductor because your ears are attuned to those things that we teach and acquire in chamber music, right? I mean, really, if you want to be a musician, you have to play chamber music, especially as a cellist. I mean, you just have to. And in turn, it makes you a much better listener, right? So then I won a search. There were like 50 candidates from all over the country for the associate conductor position, and I won fair and square. I was one of the finalists. I got up. The orchestra wrote comments. Some loved me. Some thought, "Oh, he has a long way to go," et cetera, which I did, But interestingly enough, I shouldn't really admit this, I was never formally trained as a conductor. I did a lot. Of course, we all train as cellists. I sat for my scholarship at Juilliard, the conductor's orchestra. And Sixten Ehrling, the then very imposing maestro of the Detroit Symphony, he was Swede, and he was a terror. I mean, he'd rip apart these student conductors, right? For the excerpts that we're playing. It might be something from La Bohème. It might be a difficult thing in Rimsky-Korsakov tone poem, et cetera, but he would just kill him. And I was thinking, okay, that's not a very pleasant way to learn how to teach. Although, lots of teachers were yellers in those days, not just Ehrling, but, this is in front of the whole entire orchestra. So I never really formally trained for conducting, but, all the time I was sitting in the section, every time I'd get up to play chamber music, I feel like that was training my ears and how to sort of unify things.
Excellent.
So I came I won that position. Then I went to Western Michigan University. Well, the job was originally cello and conducting. We had a very famous, in our area, man named Herbert Butler, who was a masterful pedagogue and conductor. And I think he was the conductor of Western Orchestra, and also such a great pedagogue that the man had some damage to his joints or something in the right hand. So he actually restrung the cello and taught himself to play backwards, if you can imagine. I can't even imagine that. And he performed that way. He actually, and you listen to recordings, that guy could play the cello, But he was wonderful. But however, then came in some different faculty, and they weren't sure that they wanted to combine the conducting jobs. So I was only cello, but when you start a string program, you need a string person conducting. So we started string chamber orchestra, and I conducted that till I finally took over the orchestra, which was in 1998. So with the full orchestra. So that was my sort of. But there are huge correlations between all the things that you mentioned, right? The teaching of the cello, the conducting, chamber, and the performance of chamber music. By the way, my Merlin trio, which I played in for 30 years with Susan Uchimura, my wife, and Renata Kniffick on violin, we had a great run. Not many groups don't last as long as we did, but we had a great run, and I learned a lot from that experience. We don't perform anymore, but by choice, because we felt like when Renata retires, we're going to stop the trio, and that's sort of what happened. Renata and Tom Kniffick retired 2 years ago, and then Susan also retired at that time from the trio activity. So, but there's a huge correlation between all of those, activities.
Well, so for example, there in the topic of inspiration or motivation, there can be times when a particular student is just on a particular day just not terribly motivated, and then there's other times where they can start to lose some steam even for the big picture. And among I think you're about number 35 or so in this series. And it's interesting to see how very different people's approaches and answers and on the idea of inspiration can be. And for some, the fuel, the rejuvenation can come from something like improvisation or non-classical playing, to kind of maybe relate other types of music that they either love more or just are more internalized because they grew up with them, etc. But I think there's also a degree to which something like chamber music, or that ability to not just be thinking of the piece in terms of, well, I get started at this particular speed and I go until I get to the end. And when you're playing in a chamber ensemble, it never feels like that. It always feels like a fascinating conversation where you kind of basically know where it's going, but are fitting together with everybody else and being as much of a listener as you are a proactive thinker. Kind of those improv comedy where it's yes and.
That's correct.
So I'm just curious if you have a student who is either having a day in which they're not terribly motivated, or just maybe one of those semesters even, what are some of the things you do to get them fired back up about this wonderful art we're in?
Yeah, that can be difficult. Because, as teachers, one-on-one, music students by default are very fortunate because they have an advisor, you and me, every week for the entire semester, the entire academic year, I should say. And that's quite special because in most other topics, you see an advisor once a semester. They tell you need this and you need that, or you're not going to graduate on time, et cetera, and then they say goodbye. But with us, we deal with students on a weekly basis. And as we know, in the times that we live, students are very busy creatures and very complex because of the nature of our society and what's going on in the world and stuff like that. And that reflects sometimes in the student's ability to be inspired, to work steadily, and so forth and so on. So, yeah, we're part therapist. So sometimes it's you dig. You don't want to dig too deep because we're not therapists, but you want to recognize where there might be depression or might be overworked or not being able to manage their schedule well, or not understanding how much work it takes, or not understanding the consistency of work. So all of those and many other things need to be factored in order to make the student stay on track. Group is very important. I have studio classes. I'm sure you do every week, and they're important. We've done Bacchianas, so sometimes if they're the violists and violins are all busy, then we do cello ensemble and so forth and so on. So that's all very relevant. I like to keep my studio very happy. That's why I don't like them to date each other, because when they break up, something bad's going to happen. It's not going to be pretty. So, but I try to keep them so that they're all relying on each other. That helps, because sometimes things that they can tell me or want to talk to me about, they don't want to. I should say they don't want to talk to me about. They can talk to each other about. Mm-hmm. So that's all. The ways in which, but it's terribly complex. But yes, I do use musical things. This generation is blessed with all the technology that's there. I mean, you want a fingering? Just a YouTube. Somebody will tell you exactly how to finger an excerpt or a pop or etude or a passage in the concertos. You remember COVID? All the great cellists, right? Pablo and Johannes Moser and so forth. Would do these because they were bored. And so they might as well share their stories with everybody else. And, that's kind of not fair because they're so incredibly talented. They just like, well, you still look really good and I can't do that. True. So get to work. And, the fact that all of the students need that extra inspiration. Some of them are born with it. It's true. The hard work ethic, all the things that music teaches us that are valuable for whatever they pursue in life. Hopefully it'll be music, maybe not. And all of those things are relevant. My own two daughters were music majors in undergraduate, but then went on to other things. And they both said the music major was very valuable to them. not just, the practical skills, problem solving, analysis, discipline, et cetera, but the fact that people like to say, oh, you were a music major before this? Because they like to see that, because they think music majors, and it's true, think out of the box a lot of times. Creativity, they're not thinking of themselves all the time. But when you sit down in orchestra, it's about everything else. One of my Uchi, they call me Uch, and one of my Uchi tests in orchestra was to say, violas, letter D, who you're supposed to be listening to. And, they go, but if they thought for a second and remembered how the passage goes, they will remember that they're playing it with the cellist. And the good ones did, or the ones that brought scores to their rehearsals, stuff like that. Yeah. And I would ask that, not just of the string players, but of the wind players too, since they're all soloists in an orchestra. What are you supposed to be listening to at a certain time? Because that's how you do music. The Elgar Concerto, we teach with fingerings and bowings. Sometimes I really hate that. But because, a person, as we all know, people are different anatomically. And so what fingering might work for Leonard Rose would not work for Starker, would not work for Piatigorsky, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same with all of our students. So that's sometimes a difficult thing, because I don't like to spoon feed them. On the other hand, they're dying to see my solutions. But I said, these are my solutions. I don't necessarily think, now I'm using these principles. I actually teach them why I did this fingering and did this bowing and what to do with the bow. Yeah, it gets terribly detailed, and some are very good with that. They want that, and it gets their mind stimulated and so forth. Others, it's like speaking Hawaiian, it's like, aloha, I know aloha, and that's it. So it's kind of a challenge, but yes, that's a very good question. I say, okay, at the beginning of the Elgar Concerto, who did somebody play the theme before you? Oh, yeah, I guess so. And why did he write it in 9/8, for example, this theme? And why did he present it 4 times? And, with little bit variant, mezzo forte, 2 pianos and 1 pianissimo. And what's the function of that theme, and how are you going to present it? Because they'll remember it. I mean, he wanted that people to remember that theme, obviously. Oh, that gets them thinking. You see what I mean? So it's very difficult to know. Also, too, you got to experiment with students, because you don't know what's going through their mind sometimes, So it's all it takes a lot of work, a lot of questioning and posturing and so forth and so on. But you do get, as you know, Benjamin, you do get better at it as time goes on, because it's sort of the been there, done that. I've seen this type of student, not with these specific problems, but the same type. And then you can help them on their way, hopefully. Sometimes not. Sometimes it requires, professional counseling, for example, or, their family problems that you can't really solve. COVID did that. One of my students, the poor mother got COVID and was on a ventilator. It's terrible to go through those things, So anyway, yes, it's a complex bug, but very rewarding.
Okay, now, as though the cello playing and the teaching and the conducting weren't enough, you took it upon yourself in a sabbatical to delve more into this idea of entrepreneurship and the role that it can, should, will play. Can you talk about what you learned there and your thoughts on entrepreneurship?
I should say music education. Oh, one of the things I tell my students is, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing, I probably would have been a music educator in the schools, because I love that. I really, that's how I was raised. And I know how important and how good it can be, the experience of being an orchestra director in the schools. And they're always one step ahead of us, the college guys, because they know that they have to recruit kids. They're not going to practice, but they're interested in the music, and and so forth and so on. But they have to sell it so that the kids enjoy it. So you can't just sit there and berate them that they're not playing Mozart in tune. That doesn't mean anything to them. But you say, well, let's improvise. Oh, okay, I like that. Do you like this kind of music? Sure. Okay, let's do that. Do you like bluegrass? I don't know. How do you do that? Then you show them, oh, I'd like to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So they're always one step ahead of us, right? One of my colleagues in Michigan, Grand Rapids, has an ABC orchestra, all but classical. However, in order to, and the kids love it, right? Because it's all popular things and improvisations of it. You have to play in school orchestra. So that's the caveat. And he's very successful with it. You know, others, right, have started, right, when we had the huge interest in Celtic music, right, alternative. So alternative forms become, as I was looking at it, I thought, wow, everybody's doing this. Then my own students started doing it. So one cellist, very good cellist, was in an Irish band. And he sounded really good. He played guitar and cello. But when he played guitar, there was a freedom associated to his playing. And I said, how come you don't play the cello like that? You know, you in the cello, you know, but it did help him in his relaxation techniques. And it did help him to become another one. Became interested in hip hop and arranging Beatles tunes, whatever other, you know, sort of music that he liked for the cello. One-man show. So he could perform in concert venues, coffee shops, bars, you know, so all this stuff. Another student that was started on the education track, pretty good cellist, came to me in her senior year and said, I don't know if I want to do education. Okay, you know, because you can come back, I can come back for it, she said, if I want to finish the student teaching and all this stuff, but I don't know if I want to do that. So I let's just do performance. And I thought, okay, fine, because she had to find herself in terms of her playing. Well, she is the cellist, Ali Haraberta of Moxie Strings, one of the most successful bluegrass, you know, they do the whole show with the electric instruments and stuff like that. And that she found her niche with Diana Ladio. You know, it's incredible, these two, what they do. I had them over to Western because I was so inspired after watching what they do and how they get kids to improvise and so on and so on in a very short amount of time. So those two girls have it down to a science. But there are all kinds of things that people need. And boy, did I get an earful on the entrepreneurship sabbatical from all these people that I interviewed. So that would be anybody that has taken what they learned in music, whether they were a performance major, education major, or therapy major, and how they went with it in terms of their life. Now, the big question, I think, is can they make a living out of it? Some do, some don't, you know. And I'm talking about people that may run community music schools, may somehow use alternative music either highly professionally in a group that performs a lot, like Moxie Strings, or something, you know, included in. So what did they tell me? All kinds of things. We need business courses because a student has a great group. Great. First thing you can go to a manager and the manager will take all your money and, you know, and you'll still not be able to eat. Or you can self-manage, but that requires having skills, social media skills, technology skills, business plan, taxes, subcontracting, all those things. So that was very interesting to me, how these kids became so savvy in the practical. Well, the world looks at it as practical. Musicians look at it like, I don't know, what is that? Can I give it to somebody to do? Yeah, but you got to pay money, you know, for it and so forth. So those things became all relevant. What they should learn in the applied areas of music, you know. So why isn't a semester devoted to improvisation? Good question. It is with jazz majors, but not classical. Why is it that they don't have a music history alternative that's the history of hip hop or gender in music, so forth and so on? So all those things became came to the forefront in my discussions with them about what they think colleges should be teaching young musicians nowadays, which is true. You know, you play the instrument well, you can do that in a lot of places, right? It used to be you had to go to a big city and a big teacher to do that. Not anymore. You can learn, if there's a good teacher in your area, you can improve a great deal on your instrument. So that's a given. So now what? And so the now what becomes very, very interesting to me. How music will progress in the future, you know, and survive. You know, we have to keep the past alive. And I don't think anybody has a problem with that. But the question is how, you know, how do you do that? And everybody's trying to answer this question, right? Symphony orchestras with their programming and their the way they give concerts, where they give concerts, right? Chamber music societies, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody's on us, you know, in academia, has to be on board with that because it's going to change.
It's going to change. Yeah. Fascinating. Well, Bruce, upcoming projects or performances or things on your to-do list, musically speaking?
Yeah, more and more now. Funny thing in the university, right? We Benjamin knows what I'm talking about. But for those of you that are not in academia, there is the wonderful applied activities that we all do: teach the cello, coach chamber music, conduct orchestras. But there is also this thing called committee work, and committee work can be tedious. And usually, I tell you a funny story that I was always blessed because orchestra rehearsed during committee meeting times. So I was exempt from faculty meetings, et cetera, because my rehearsals were on at that time. So it was quite interesting in that way. However, now I'm on committees, so I feel like I'm learning a lot. I just got placed on I have served, of course, on promotion and tenure committee, but I, now I'm on curriculum, graduate, those kinds of things, and I'm learning a lot. So,
excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Uchimura. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I know there was lots of motivating and inspiring and just plain interesting stuff to mull over. I find myself thinking about an interview. A lot of the ideas will just stay with me, and I know they will with my students as well. So I'm very excited to discuss it with them too.
Good.
All right. Well, till next time then, and thanks again. And to everybody out there, thanks again to Young Auditorium, our sponsors this week, and happy practicing. We'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.